hello, hello. My head is so big, look at that. That's frightening. Okay, let's take a look at these firms. I call it the all-star team of growth for the AEC industry. Look at those top two firms. Nearly 20 billion in revenue from the top two firms. I don't know if you know how many people that takes. I looked up this morning. 170,000 people amongst those top two players. That was about 4 billion 10 years ago. It's now 20 billion. So we've seen massive consolidation in this industry. So I'd say this is our first team All-American in terms of growth All-Stars. So my eyes are so bad I can hardly see that. It might be turning around a little bit. But let's take a look at this set. So what's the deal? Of the top 6, all of them are public. Of the top 10, 8 are public. Of the top 18, 12 are public. A little bit of a trend there. So I guess if you want to be a top 10 player, you got to more or less be public. Now the other thought that I had was the breakdown, employee owned. That's great. But let's look at the age of these firms. 94 years? I don't have 94 years. 94 years to make it to this list on average. That's just an insane amount of time. And look at the employee-owned companies. On the top 10, HDR is like 121 years, is it? 102 years. Burns and Mac, 121 years. Oh, that's so depressing to me. You know, I want to cut that by like 50 years minimally. So that's the first team. Second team, let's look at these folks. So these folks do a revenue of approximately 500 million to $1 billion. And we have 2 or 3 up top. We got Golder, TRC, Kimley Horn. Looks like they're going to eclipse that $1 billion threshold here pretty soon. And then, so they're just massive companies. But what we've seen a change, but let me give you the stats first for these companies. 74, again, depressing. But when you look at the ownership, 10 employee-owned firms. So that's that trend. It's a great model to get from $500 million to $1 billion, and then to make that next leap, it looks like perhaps you need to be public or wait 121 years. But now we have some new financing arrangements in our industry. We've got PE money in TRC up there, who's going to make that leap here pretty soon, is backed by New Mountain. I guess they were public some time ago, but New Mountain's a great firm, and there are others, one other that's PE backed. And there's, you talk in the industry and there's pros and cons. Well, I think it's great. It allows accelerated growth. We're an employee-owned firm. We don't have PE money. But, and also the public companies, they leverage their multiples. Well, that's great as well. You'd do it if you were public, as would I. But I'd first like to look, which one of these companies is not like the other? And you look at the age, and one just jumps out at you, Dickerson Wright. Every time I see him, I say, Dickerson, give me the playbook. Just write it down on a piece of paper. How do you do it? 10 years to get to $500 million? And he's got 2,000 to 3,000 employees. So to get to $1 billion in revenue, you need about 4 to 5, maybe over 5,000 employees. That's a lot of hires. I thought we were cool when we hit 500 a couple years ago. But getting 10 times that amount is going to be daunting. But it really is interesting, those stats, where it takes a long time. But things are out there today where that time frame is compressing. 2007, here's a listing of the top 36. There was 13 companies that eclipsed the $1 billion mark back then. So there's 36 players. Out of those 36, 16, or approximately half, have all merged together. So the big are getting bigger. And is that going to continue? Yes, for sure. It is. It's a very fragmented market. There's a lot of people out there to gobble up. And it's going to continue. And another reason it's going to continue in the design arena, the engineering and architectural arena, and professional services, is because all of those top players that we showed on that first slide are fleeing from the at-risk EPC market. Over the last 120 days, I won't name names, but a lot of those firms have lost anywhere from $100 billion to $1.2 or to $2 billion. Crazy times. The risk profile of that EPC work, when you take it at risk and there's subjective criterias in place, we see, we're a traditional AEC firm, but we do a lot of forensics work as well. So we see a lot of these companies, we work in a lot of distressed situations on that side of the house. And we're faced with this and we're looking at it, and that's why I have my expert witness background. But it is very interesting to see how a couple years ago, all of these firms were diving in headfirst to the construction arena. They were buying up, there's $90 billion construction companies as of this year, and they were buying up a lot of them. And they were jumping in headfirst, and they found out very quickly that this wasn't for them. Or, you know, they'll do cost plus work, but this at-risk EPC work, which is where the mega projects are, they're not gonna do that. So what does that mean for these lists? They're just gonna get bigger on professional services because they're laser focused on that right now. You look at those top two players, laser focused on professional services. So I see moving forward the big, again, getting bigger and gobbling up a lot of market share. I love this. This is the 2007 ENR Top 500. And it says at the end of April, it's actually my birthday, it says, this is the greatest market ever. This design professional services market is incredible. Couldn't be better. Yeah, some staffing issues. 4 months later, the world blows up. Absolutely blows up. So everyone was looking the other way, and why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons why, but that economic cycle was only about 5 years long, 02 to 07. So it was a short cycle, it was an average cycle actually. So now, do we have this problem now? Do we have our head in the sand? No. Now we're skittish, we're filled with uncertainty, we're in uncharted territory, we have an expansion cycle that's 10 years and 3 months long. So everyone's like, oh my God, we're gonna have a recession tomorrow, oh God. So it's very interesting, different times. But before I get into this, I wish the recession would just happen. It's like, let's get on with life. Let's have a little blip. I long for the days of an 8% unemployment. I heard, someone told me when you post a job posting, people will actually apply to it. It's something new and different. I mean, today, I think we have 50 or 60 openings, and it's like, I don't know, maybe we get 1 or 2 resumes. So we're left with M&A, growth through M&A, trying organic growth, but it's very hard with a 3% unemployment rate. And that's not going any lower. It's basically less than 0 at this point. But in the public arena, we looked at those top firms, that first team all-star, 8 of the top 10, 15 or 12 of the top 18, 15 of the top 36. Of these 15, they traded, as of 2 days ago, a 28.8% multiple. And I know we usually go off multiples of EBIT, so it's less than that, but it's still 15 to 20 or so. So it's a great advantage they have on the big side, and I applaud them for applying that advantage. And there's pros and cons with all ownership models. That's just why we have 8 of the top 10 folks in that public arena. So I'm going to talk about 3 things. What I want to get from that, I want to give a few takeaways that may make sense to you. I've pretty much worked for one company my whole career. I did work for a top general contractor for a couple of years out of undergraduate school. And when I talk about best practices, it's kind of what we've done and it's kind of worked. They may be worse practices, I have no idea. But it's worked, and some of it makes sense, some of it's outside the box, I believe. So we'll go through those. So we are, like I said, we had really 5 buckets. Those are 4 buckets of services: forensics, traditional engineering, environmental, and construction buckets. We also have a digital bucket. That's a big trend in the industry to have digital solutions. You got to get on that right side of the curve there. I think we did a good job acquiring a firm a couple years ago, or maybe 3 or 4 years ago, a tech firm, really just a traditional IT firm that we worked with. for many years. They've got an international presence. And now we're integrating their services into ours. And it's been nice, and now we're going to formulate, they're just basically a subsidiary right now. We're going to merge them into the kind of the mothership and offer these digital solutions. That's one thing we're definitely seeing. We have 25 plus offices in North America, and we have approximately 600 folks. We'd like to be at about 800 this time next year. We've got a couple deals. If they go, I think at least one of the 4 will go, but we'll probably be at that mark. So a lot of you folks out there are bigger than us, but we have averaged approximately 20 to 30% growth for 24 years, and we want to keep that up. And if we average 20% growth through 2028, that basically gets us to $1 billion in revenue. So it's hard now, though. We're well into this cycle. So 20% growth year over year, now that we're a little bit larger, is harder to come by, and the deals are looking bigger. And at a 3% unemployment rate, organic growth is suffering. So we're looking to work with our great bankers from Wintrust and trying to grow through these larger acquisitions. Here's a typical economic cycle. We have our expansion, we have our peak, and then we have our recession. So our strategy basically changes throughout a traditional economic cycle. And we're going to go over that, but I'm also going to go over economic indicators that I look at on almost a daily basis. I'm a numbers guy. I love the numbers. I love big data. And what we see out there, predominantly in the US, it really affects the decisions that we make. So this is from yesterday. As I said, the market's skittish. But should the market be at 27,000? Probably not. PE ratios are slightly high. They're not out of hand, but you know, the market's at 26. That's still a great thing. We've had tremendous growth. I almost want to see the market at like 25 to 26, so we don't have this massive correction when we see a downturn. And as I said, we're 10 years and 3 months into our economic expansion cycle. It's the longest on record, uncharted territory. The last one was in the 90s. Why have we had these two, over the last 30 years, the 2 longest expansion cycles? Well, one of the reasons why is Alan Greenspan, way back when, decided to really run the world through the federal funds rate. It used to be money supply, which really, it moved the economy slower. Now they can quickly adjust and quickly put the brakes on the economy through Fed funds rate growth. And what we saw over 2000, so one of the main reasons why we're in this is because we had no real inflation until 2018. Construction's a different story. But CPI, we've had very little inflation. And because of that little inflation, we've been able to slug along at a low growth rate and maintain this growth cycle. But then all of a sudden we had this interest, this boom, 3% plus boom in 18 and early Q1 of 19. They ticked the Fed funds rate up 9 times, and then the brakes immediately came on the economy. So they're in that balancing act, and we'll go over that. So unemployment rate. Where do you think we are in this cycle? We are late cycle, as late can be. Right before every recessionary period, you have a trough of unemployment. It bottoms out, and it bottoms out for like 1 or 2 years. And we're about a year into it. And as I said, we are at 3.7% unemployment, which they say 5% unemployment is really 0% due to the transitional nature of employment. But we're at it was at 3.6, 3.8, now it's 3.7. It's really, really low. 50 or 69 it hit this mark. And I think in the 50s you can see it was even lower, but that's not gonna happen. So we're in this, it is what it is. Companies can't grow at a 3% unemployment rate. It's just very difficult. Yield curve. So everyone talks about yield curve, 10-year T-bill versus minus the 2-year T-bill. We want higher returns on our 10-year. And what happens is when you have an economy that's a little bit shaky, everyone pulls their money out of the equities markets and throws it into the 10-year T-bill. And because of that, the federal government says, oh, we have all this demand for a 10-year, we're going to give you less money. We were paying 2.5%. I think as of yesterday, we're paying 1.6%. And no one's buying the short-term bonds. They want the long-term stability, and as a result, your 2-year is now trading at 1.5, 10 years 1.6, but in August it flipped to negative, so it's been very flat of late, but now it's a negative, it inverted, technically inverted. And that, again, that happens 1 to 2 years before a recession. So that's where we are, and those are the cold hard facts. One thing, though, that is different about this yield curve is that so you have negative interest rates in Europe. What are they going to do with their money? Well, they're jumping for joy over a 1.5% interest rate. So they'll buy that 10-year all day long. So you can see the foreign investment has shot up by a multiple of 3 over the last 10 years. And that's really impacted that yield curve inversion. So this curve is a little bit different from past curves, but nonetheless, it's more or less the same. And then we have GDP growth. So we're in a technical recession when we have 2 quarters of negative growth. And we haven't had that yet, but we're having a slowing economy. As you can see, we had a swift economy except for Q4 of last year, but we were in the 3s. That's for an economy our size. It's really good. But they ticked up rates 9 times. It slowed the economy. Now it went to 2. Forecast for Q3 is 1.6 or maybe 1.8, 1.7. So it's going to slow down. So it's just a question of, is it going to dip negative? Now, based on the graphs that I've just shown you, it looks like we have a year of runway, but everyone's very skittish. And that's why I'm saying, let's just get it over with. So we have the CPI, and it's not as clean. This one's not as clean. And the reason why this isn't, it usually have a peak, inflation peak right before a recession. Pricing goes up. For instance, in construction, I remember like a couple years ago, we would be penciling and designing, and in some cases building apartment projects for $120 a square foot. You can't even touch one for like $220 anymore, at least in the Colorado marketplace. I know everywhere's different. But there's been massive inflation there. But the CPI has been held back because energy over the past 12 months is down by 50%, which is a large piece of this. So it's a little bit artificial when we show these numbers. I think we really do have significant inflation over the last year, and it's certainly affecting our industry. Fed funds rate, it peaks before a recession. There's a little, runs flat for a little bit, and then it dives. As soon as we hit the recession, Jay Powell or Janet Yellen or whoever, Greenspan, all these guys, they would drop, cut through the recessionary cycle. And then all of a sudden, money's really cheap. It boosters the economy. But what we're seeing here, I mean, what's different here, Fed funds rate's at 2%. There's nothing to work with anymore. You used to have 6, 7% interest. They cut it by 4%. That's a big move. Now we only have 2%. There's not that many cuts. And that's why they're being stuck. There's a big feud between Trump and Powell. Well, if I'm Powell, I'm like, I need some reserve there to actually make an impact once we hit the recession. Otherwise, it's going to be a prolonged recession. My estimate is it's not going to be severe. It's just going to be a little bit longer. It's not going to be like 01, 02, where it's, less than 12 months and you're out. I think here, what we're going to see is a little bit of a prolonged one, but not a huge negative growth in terms of GDP. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, though. So put in place construction, Census Bureau data. I keep a real close eye on this. We haven't had negative growth in the construction industry, which affects all of us, in almost 10 years. 2010, I believe. Been growing, positive, steady growth, much faster than the overall economy. So what happens with the construction industry, it usually goes faster than GDP, and then it overcorrects. It gets more negative in downturns. And you can see it, that cycle. You have the steady line here, and you have the big wave. So it's very interesting to watch. But here we go. We're starting to see it contract because of that construction costs are so high. It's a $1.3 trillion industry. $1 trillion is private, 300 is public. Half of that private's resi. And residential really has that ebb and flow, really ebbs and flows, especially in the last downturn, of course. So we're seeing, but what happens in the downturn when you have a public marketplace that's tanking or compressing, or you have a private marketplace that's compressing, public marketplaces go crazy. So it's a great time to be in the public sector right now. And when you look at it, right now, put in place construction in 2019 is eerily similar to December. This is the annualized numbers, December of 2007. So what we can see here, overall, 2% compression, just like now. Now we have about 5% compression on the private sector, that's 6. And we have a 6-point boost, which is one of the highest boosts over the last 10 years, on the public sector. So very, very similar numbers. And when we look at this, we can see that those 2 years are real close percentage-wise. And you can see through the gray shaded recession area, the public sector does really nicely. And then you get private sector really hurting. And that's where we are. We're at a tipping point. It may be 12 months, it may be less than that, but it's coming. And like I said, it's going to be, if you're positioned for it, and you lean in, and you go into these recessions from a position of strength, hey, no big deal. You're going to jump out of it and take advantage of the opportunities. So that's what we do with our strategy. Construction escalation, materials, labor, they've been running almost double of CPI for 10 years. And that's why, because of that, that's why we have the overcorrections in both directions, in up markets and in down markets. It overcorrects because it runs at a higher pace, inflation-wise. So, we have our 3 phases of an economic cycle. We've got early to mid phase, start of an expansion period. We have late cycle, which is where we are now, and then we have a down cycle. So what do? Oh, and here's a traditional, the last recession, although it was a great recession, it was a traditional looking cycle. We had our up cycle. The late cycle actually came early. You can see that way back in 05 or so. And then the down cycle was just massive. But it's a traditional looking curve. So again, during this downturn, private markets tank, public markets do well. That said, what do? In the down markets, in the late cycle, we're very much interested, well, there's low growth potential on the private side, so we steer clear from that. There's public sector, that's going to be great. We look for those deals, and we always look for non-cyclical deals. Like that. So I would liken our, if we were to benchmark ourselves, it would be like a Wisgeny or a Thornton Tomasetti or Simpson Gumper type of a setup. But we do have a construction arm as well, mainly program management, owner's rep type work, consulting practice. But that forensic type area has been great for us during downturns, and in fact, we do quite well during those times because of the trouble that it creates, and we get involved in that. So what we've been doing is moving a lot of our resources over to forensics and training them and right-sizing the groups that are really susceptible to these markets. We know they're coming, and we're managing our strategy. But once we get into the well into the down cycle, we love private company acquisitions. They're valued properly. We're at a size we can't afford. If someone makes $3 million in EBIT and they want a 5 or 6x, and then through a down, and they're predominantly private sector, we can't afford for them to go down to $500,000 during a 3 or 4 year stretch. We're just not that big. So that's something we got to keep a close eye on. So we want to have a good ROI on our investments. So we try to, as best we can, guide what we're looking for in our decision making. And then in kind of early cycle, mid-market, we look at both. We know there's runway. I think expansion cycles are going to continue to be a little bit longer. History doesn't necessarily suggest that, only the last 30 years. But I think with that M1 monetary policy, perhaps that might be the case. Okay, so now we're going to talk about our Rule of 20 plan. So back in 95 to 2010, really our first 15 years in operation, we just were gung-ho. I was running around the country opening up offices, and we really had no plan. It was just kind of resultant from our activities. And it was great. But now, back in 2011, we said, all right, let's settle back here and figure out what our growth plan is. And I came up with this really complicated strategy of growing 10% through 20%, Rule of 20, through 2022. Year over year, EBITDA. Very crazy, very technical, I know. And so we have 15 divisions, and that's daunting. If you're going to grow EBIT by 20% for 11 years, that's a multiple of over 6. And when you hear that, you're like, oh God, that's going to be hard. But we broke it down. We had 15 service area verticals. And we basically said, how do you eat an elephant? Okay, what's your service area look like? Let's go ahead and envision what it looks like in 11 years. If you're doing, and I'll go back and forth a bit, but if you're doing $250,000 a year, now you got to be at 1.5 in 11 years. What does that look like? Is where you are, your market penetration, are you going to be able to get there with your service line? Or are you going to need to drop in new services? And we stuck this 2022 as a goalpost. And we stuck it right in the sand, and we said, we're not going to look at a 10-year plan or a 5-year plan that keeps evolving. We're solely focused on next year, and we're solely focused on 2022. And so our managing directors of our budgets, it's almost like a chess game. They have all these pieces. They have all these service areas, and we know, back in 11, we thought there was going to be a recessionary cycle by 17 or 18. Didn't happen. But we said, hey, listen, we don't care about the recessionary cycle. Figure out, assume that that's the case, figure out a forensic angle to build that so that can grow through the down market and go from there. And so when you look at this, it's like how many folks is it going to take, how many offices, how many additional services are you going to need, where can you get there, do we need to supplement with M&A, particularly at 3% unemployment. It has really worked remarkably well. Overly simple, yes, perhaps that's a good thing, but it is the buzz in every discussion that we have, every annual meeting, and I don't know, it's worked thus far, and we actually built in about a year float. We're about a year, maybe a half year to a year ahead of schedule, or we have been. So that's worked pretty well. We're also focused on clients that can give us repeat business. 85, I think, % mark of our business comes from repeat customers. We don't want one-and-done clients. Being in construction is tough because you have a lot of that. So we're not in those markets, design, bid, build, where we're just hard bidding for projects. We want repeat business, and we want to see what services they're requiring. And there is certainly a trend, which we've taken advantage of some of the larger developers and insurance companies and others are really interested in master service agreements and providing one-stop shopping. So we've taken advantage of that, built our infrastructure, and we've grown through that. So we're growing through our existing client base, really dropping in new services that they buy, and that's been a decent strategy for us. So we have a One Vertex account management system, and Mark Dagenars, I'm going to ask you a quick question. Mark is a managing director for our construction group, which is one of our larger verticals. And I don't know if you have a microphone. I think they gave it to you. We'll see if it's live. Is that up and running?
Hello?
There we go. Imagine that. In terms of account management, well, let me go back. In terms of the rule of 20, I think you would agree having that goalpost really affects your decision making and your team. And how many verticals do you have?
There's 7. There's 7 within the group, but I think the key in setting that long-term goal has focused our efforts, I think, better than we ever have, right? Because we're always looking at our short-term objectives. Bill touched on it very briefly, but the OKRs, and I think you may have a slide on it later on, we're always looking 90 days down the line, and we're taking these short steps, but we always have that 2022 goal in mind. So by doing the short steps and looking at it year over year in the long-term goal, it allows us some flexibility. It allows us to pivot, be nimble as things, economic conditions change. We take a look at things where ideally certain things we'd like to grow organically, but the unemployment is so low right now, so it's challenging. So we focus on maybe a small M&A in order to bolt on to a business to overcome maybe an obstacle we've run into another. So we're constantly shifting, but the overall number for 2022 does not change.
Yeah, and it's like a chess match each year. You got to figure out what you're going to grow, what you're not going to grow, and like.
And if you've had an issue, we've taken a couple businesses and some of the units within my group, and it doesn't work well in certain markets. We've gone ahead and we've made some changes there, and we've shifted a focus to something that's emerging, more profitable, and allows us to diversify our existing skills and really our buckets.
And Mark, let's talk about, because we run very lean, and we want the seller-doer model, and we try to promote that, but we were using Salesforce, and it's really expensive, and it's a great system. Probably the best, or one of the best. And, but we can't have 600, 700, 800 licenses. We just can't afford that. So Lisa here created our One Vertex system, and it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. But why don't we talk about how we have more or less, rather than full-time BD people, more or less facilitators in implementing our account management program.
Right, so the account management program has been key to our growth, right? I have no problem admitting I wasn't a big believer of it in the beginning. I kind of got dragged into it. It's like, I don't know if this is going to work.
I agree.
And what we've realized and recognized in an area that we really thought was nearing full maturity, through the account management program and with the seller-doer idea and that whole thought process, it's allowed to have focus on the client, really show them a little bit more of our expertise across the company, and we've grown the businesses in excess of where we really thought we were going to. So we're actually ahead of our 2022 goal as a result of this program.
And Dickerson Wright mentioned in the session earlier that he wants the client with the person that's going to be performing the work, the smartest guy or gal in that industry. And that's really pushing that. And if we don't have the system in place, the process in place, a lot of times it just doesn't happen, right?
Right, and it's, without the process, it doesn't happen. And the seller-doer mentality is key and critical for us, because we just don't have salespeople that go in. Our clients want to see, and I'm sure many of our clients, they want to see the same person. Okay, you're in here, you're helping, you're not selling me somebody else in your company. You're actually doing the work, you're at the table. I had a good experience with that today, right? But it's constantly what we're doing, where we're out in the front, we're out in the forefront with our clients, and then by them seeing that type of commitment and introducing new individuals, whether it is junior account managers with certain clients, it grows their comfort level and growth to give us more business.
So our dedicated BD team is focused on new prospects, almost exclusively. And our account management team, a project manager will have 5 to 10 accounts, and then the facilitator will ensure that the requisite number of touches is actually happening. And it's been pretty impactful, and I'm with you. Jeff Picard and Lisa from our office developed this, and I wasn't a massive believer, and then the results over a fairly short amount of time. And we had a beta project with Tubert within your group, beta project, and now it's been rolled out. And we can't say enough about it. We see that the facilitator roles are really impactful. and it's been pretty good. And in turn, we also have, we haven't had great luck expanding into new markets and finding someone in that market. So we have this train and move process that we have, and we go out to key folks, multiple folks, and say, hey, we want to open in Arizona or Phoenix, and we'd like for you to consider a 3-year commitment to go down there. We'll give you more money, and we think you'd be perfect at it. And it's really promoting organic growth in regional offices. And that goes back to your rule of 20, and that's all figured in.
Right, you're constantly thinking of it, right? So with that goalpost, how do I get there? All right, I've fully matured in this market. I need to get over here and into this market. This is where business is booming. Things are starting to turn. And you're constantly looking at it. So our year-over-year number, maybe you have a little bit of a flat spot, but then you pivot and you're quick on your feet, and then you make a move that allows you to continue that growth towards the goal line.
And now we were talking about OKRs. OKRs is objectives and key results. It's a goal-setting philosophy that's really been embraced by the tech industry. Andy Grove created it, and a guy named John Doerr. He wrote a book, Measure What Matters, and I highly encourage all of you to get that book. It's really been a great thing for us over the last several years. And it's really setting goals, like an example, it's setting a limited amount of corporate goals. One is Rule of 20, which is every year. The other one is enhancing our employee experience, and one's enhancing the client experience. And we break the goals up into pieces, and they cascade downward. And we had an OKR software, which was a little bit clunky, didn't work so well, focused almost exclusively before that. Again, it was a licensing and cost issue. But we went to a Teams and Planner issue, and it's just been great. And it keeps everyone focused on the rule of 20, where they need to be on 90-day chunks. We say, here are the 3 things over the next 90 days you need to really work on, or they really develop their own. You have your team, your EVPs develop their own OKRs. Again, try to limit it to 1 to 3 and say, what's the one thing we need to do in order to make our 2022 goal over the next 90 days? So it's really dividing everything up into these 90-day chunks and having a goalpost. Now, what's going to happen when we get to 2022? Well, I'm going to create another program, probably a 2030 program, but it will be launched maybe 6 months before we hit that 2022 number. So it's a nice system, and here are just screenshots on some of the Q4 goals that Mark has, LD has, my goals, and it's like, okay, we're moving into a down cycle. Let's bolster our forensic capabilities. Let's try to expand our public marketplace. In order to really promote some of our forensic work, we need to refresh our web page. Let's get some script there. Those are the main three things that I need to be focused on the next 90 days. And Mark, you have yours. And these are transparent, so everyone sees them. Anyone can see what I'm doing, what I'm focused on, or what Mark's focused on, or Lisa, etc. And it's just it's a system that hasn't been embraced by the AEC industry, but I don't know. It may work. I think it works pretty well with us. I just think what we found was the annual goal setting. We would write our goals. We'd look at them 4 times in January and then dust them off in December. And maybe you hit some, maybe you didn't. But this is a way to keep them front and center, and everyone's accountable to one another. And it's just been a nice goal-setting process for us. And the next thing I want to talk about is just kind of growth as DNA. I think the session earlier, Ozzy was saying, some folks don't want to grow. Some companies want to be 30-person companies and crank out great work, and they like that, and that works. And we want to continually build our foundation. We want our triangle to get bigger and bigger and bigger over time. It's just something was in our DNA when we started the company, and something we haven't lost, and something that we're almost more focused on now than ever, now that we have these OKRs and Rule of 20 plans, so it's really formalized, and everyone's really focused on it. But it's been great. But if it was up to me, And I'm kind of the deal guy in the company. If it was up to me, we probably would have been, what do you think, Mark, bankrupt 4 years ago? So we have this yin and yang, where I give veto power to Mark, our CFO, and I bring deals to the table, and then once we talk numbers, he wants me a minimum of 5 states away. And it's really, it's worked well. He wants to grow as well, as do I, but we both want smart growth. I know my strengths and weaknesses, I accept them, and having that smart growth, but having that growth culture where everyone knows we are moving forward and in the right direction, I think has been great. And in addition to that, with the growth, you can create 20 to 30-year plans with your employees. We just have a new HR system that we put in place. And for every employee, we're having like a 10-year growth plan. And we want that ceiling to keep on being higher. We say, okay, what moves do you want to make in the company? Where do you want to be? What do you like more? Do you want to shift over to design, engineering design, structural, civil, or whatever? And we're mapping that out. We're also mapping out professional development plans, 10-year plans. So we have a lifetime of learning initiative, which we'll talk about. But this, we call it LOLP initiative. That's more or less saying, hey, we're going to map out, maybe let's work on getting your PE for the next 3 or 4 years. Let's figure out what certifications you need. We had this, our Vertex University was really training, and it was great, and we still do it, but training on kind of what we do, project management, cybersecurity, and all of these other things, and that's valuable. But if our employees leave Vertex, it's got very little to no value to them. So our thoughts are, let's get relationships with a bunch of higher ed universities. Let's develop online content if they don't have it. Let's get a deal on credit hours, all in state, maybe a discount from there. And we'll guarantee that we're going to funnel X amount of folks through this system. And let's get an advanced enrollment process. So we've shifted our focus to our lifetime of learning. And that's why Jamie talked about some of the degrees that I had. I wanted to be front and center and be a leader in this program. And it's caused a huge buzz at the company. We have, I don't know, 40 or 50 people at a minimum, I think a semester going through these schools. We have deals with the University of Colorado, with UC Irvine. We're working on a few schools in Florida and Boston. DU for an environmental science program. We also created a leadership track, and at CU we have an online MBA program. We're identifying folks in their 20s and 30s that are really going to be the future of Vertex, and we're sending them through MBA programs. And it is a little bit expensive, but it's prioritizing that, and that's a good differentiator for us. And again, if folks leave, and they're taking, on average, they'll take a class a semester, so it's great with retention because it lasts 5 years to get your master's. But if they do leave, they got something. That's something that we provided them, and I think that's really wonderful. And the other thing is we fear the upside down triangle. And I have a graphic I'll show you, but the upside down triangle where you have a law firm that's got 2 partners and 18 associates, and they're doing great. And then a couple years later, 5 years later, they have 10 partners and 10 associates. And then a couple of years later, they got 15 partners and 5 associates. So their all of a sudden, there's no foundation there. It's upside down triangle. And then they're not putting in their 2,000 billable hours in. They're putting in 500 because they're spending part-time. They're semi-retired. And then the company implodes. We're scared of it. We don't want that. We want that endless ceiling. We want that career path. We want the lifetime of learning program to help with quality. And we also want it so when you have that partner that's making a lot of money, where design fees might be too light, the billing rate, we want someone billing at $350 an hour so they morph into experts over time. And in addition, that One Vertex, the account management process, we talk to folks, and maybe they're not good at face-to-face meetings, and maybe they're not great to assign an account to. But we say, okay, in that instance, we need 3 or 4 white papers a year. We want blogs, we want SEO, and so everyone knows the role, everyone's got a role. So in addition, with Mark, he has to kick out a blog per service area per month. So we have a lot of good content, and that's been pretty good. And we, like I said, we just really fear that upside down triangle. We want this, ceilings going up, foundations getting bigger. That's our goal. We do not want that, and that's the scenario where there's really no middle management. So there's really no place to go until, you know, the life cycle of that company is really a quick death in my mind. So we're just, I don't know, right, wrong, or indifferent, we're afraid of it. So here's our Lifetime of Learning initiative. It's been real special. It's got a lot of traction. It's great for recruiting. It's great for retention. It takes a lot of work. We hired Russell Fitzpatrick. Well, he was working in our environmental group as a VP, senior VP. We've shifted him to our Chief Learning Officer. And he's in charge of our OKR processing, as well as our negotiating our contracts with the University of Colorado and multiple other universities, and creating that those contracts so our folks can slide through and get master's degree and PhDs. And that's been a good differentiator, and that's really supported our growth, I think, over the last couple of years, and it's created that buzz where hopefully in this day and age at 3% unemployment, keeping your people is really important. And it's certainly helped. And we're talking, if someone was a draft person and they're 70, we want them going back. Get back in there. It's lifetime. I'm still going, and it's quite different. And then lastly, to pull this off, I think we would just go, go, go for those first 15 years. And I think we would have always focused on growth, but this kind of rule of 20 has really helped us out. The yin and the yang, smart growth has been great. If it was up to me, we probably would have made a lot of bad deals and overpaid for a lot of things. Fortunately, I have a great team with me that prevents that. And it's in our DNA. It's, Ozzy was mentioning, some people don't want to grow, some people want to grow. We're in that latter category. And that's all I have. So thank you very much for your time, and it's been a great honor, and it's very humbling to be asked to do this, Jamie, and I really greatly appreciate it. So thank you very much.